Hi there, everybody. Thank you for joining me. Be great if anyone would like to say who's there. You can feel free to add it to the comments over here on the side. I think it should be on your side if you're on your computer, but if you're on your phone, it could be at the bottom. And so just something to keep in mind. I have a slightly different view on my end, and so and there's a little tiny bit of a delay. So if for some reason I see something after, that is why. So I appreciate you tuning in. And we're here for the first real episode of There's Only One Paris. And so, just to recap the objective of the project, it's to get you involved in sharing your love of Paris in these times where so many people are stuck at home and can't travel. So, the objective really is to get you involved in a fun and creative way, and it's very easy. So as the week goes on, I'm going to be putting up different posts linked to the theme for the next story. So every week there will be a story that is inspired by your comments, your ideas, and so it's a fun way to share your love of Paris. And so we had actually, I launched the project last week, and we had quite a lot of people chime in with ideas. I chose a big topic for the first episode, and there could be other stories written about it, and that is, of course, the Eiffel Tower, the city of Paris's most memorable site. And so this idea hit me for the story. These are all fiction stories, but with little inspiration from the comments that you gave. And so I came up with a fun little tale. I hope that you like it. It's a little longer than maybe some of the others will be. And so the idea is here, I will read it out to you. And that way, for those of you who've had enough screen time, which we've had lots these days, you can just listen as perhaps you're doing something else or just relaxing or in transit somewhere. And so it is, you don't need to be watching the screen. But I do want you to pay attention to that index photo, the first photo that is showing, and I will try to post it again during the recording, but I'm still getting used to this a little bit. And so you're going to be seeing lots of different topics come up over the next few weeks. I've had some great ideas from anything from picnicking on the Seine to mysteries at the Opera Garnier to discovering the kind of more offbeat areas of the city like Belleville or the Promenade Plantée. We're going to go out to the Chateau de Vincennes. So there really are a lot of possibilities, a lot of topics and fun that we're going to have together with this. And so I'd like to thank everyone who chimed in and gave their ideas. But for this particular episode, for this first story, which is called A View of the Eiffel Tower, I would like to give a few words of thanks to the people who commented on my posts soliciting some feedback for this story. And those people are, I've got a little list here, I don't want to forget anyone, are Daniel Healy Molden, Pat Kurtz, Terry Harrell, Zekia Ulmer, Wazi Hussein, Colleen Marlone Turpin, Janet, Janet who's very active on the page, Janet Conroy, Anna Nagy, and Deborah Sams, who's a wonderful commentator too. So thank you all for taking part in this first episode. And before launching into reading out the story for you, I would like to tell you what next week's story will be. And so, this coming week, we're going to be going to a very popular place in Paris. Then we're going to get offbeat a little bit. But that is the Musée d'Orsay. And that was an idea by Christine D. Moe. And it's also going to involve a particular artist that Mona Sonderborg Tompkins has suggested. And so I will leave you in suspense and I will start reading out the stories. So I hope that you like it. It's called A View of the Eiffel Tower. And so I think you can gather a little bit what it is going to be about. So here we go. But, it's supposed to be right here, said Maddie, letting out a lengthy sigh. Right here. She stared straight ahead, down the empty street, immobile and stupefied. A little red scooter whizzed by, inches from her bewildered face, breaking her spell of disbelief and forcing her back to the safety of the sidewalk. How is this possible? She questioned breathlessly. It might not have been right there in front of her, however, the image was ever so vivid in her mind's eye. The snapshot was framed on both sides by two elegant turn-of-the-century Parisian buildings, their facades of beige stone glowing in the late afternoon light. In the foreground was a curvaceous iron gate. However lovely these were, they were not the star attraction of the perspective. Perfectly centered between the buildings and just beyond the gorgeous gate was another seductive structure made of iron, La Tour Eiffel. Forget planning which restaurants she was going to eat at. Museums? Well, she'd booked a tour at the Louvre and one at the Musée d'Orsay, so she didn't need to do any prep for those. She downloaded to her phone a self-guided tour of Montmartre. She'd allocated a block of time for sitting on a cafe terrace, as you do in Paris. Everything else would fall into place. She only had this one mission. She had to get that shot. This objective was what she'd put most of her trip planning attention to. Maddie, if you don't take those vacation days, you're going to lose them, reminded her boss as the year anniversary of her new job was approaching. One of the reasons Maddie had taken the job was its extra week of vacation. And now she found herself neglecting this highly coveted perk. Her boss's comment at least knocked some sense into her. Since she was a workaholic, she hadn't been spending a lot of money. Therefore, she really could afford a little getaway. Nevertheless, the question remained. Where to go? That night provided Maddie with the answer, or rather, Instagram did. Never had she been so struck by an image. The impact was so powerful, it had stopped her dead in her scrolling tracks. One could say it was love at first sight. Decision made. She would go to Paris and find the view that had totally bewitched her. After buying her plane ticket, she went back to scrutinizing the image. The Instagrammer hadn't put the exact location of the scene, but that wasn't going to stop Maddie. She spent hours scouring the internet trying to find the spot. Alas, despite her efforts, and much to her dismay, key words like Eiffel Tower views or Eiffel Tower between buildings were leading her down one virtual dead end after another. The next day, casually lamenting over her predicament at the coffee machine, a tech-savvy colleague, Umberto, gave her the genius tip of doing a reverse image search. What a lifesaver! Sure enough, there it was. Her view. She'd found virtually the same alluring perspective on the website of a real estate agency. Although her savings fell much, much short of the asking price for the apartment the image was advertising, she had all she needed: the view's magic address. Maddie couldn't quite explain why she was so drawn to it. Was it the general ambiance of Paris the image depicted? Or was it the Eiffel Tower that attracted her so much? Maybe it was because the tower reminded her of her own town's famous monument, the Gateway Arch. The Eiffel Tower appeared to be so omnipresent in Paris, just like St. Louis's Arch. It seemed like you could round a corner and see the Eiffel Tower peek through, kind of like the North Star. Just like the Gateway Arch meant home to Maddie, the Eiffel Tower seemed like a guide, watching and always there to say, "Bonjour. Yes, here I am. Nice to see you." That is exactly what seeking out that image of the tower signified for Maddie, finding and following her North Star. "Why hadn't I activated that data plan?" sobbed Maddie helplessly from her melancholic perch on that Parisian sidewalk. She hadn't, because tech-savvy Umberto had said all she needed to do was load the address into her phone's Maps app when she was connected to her hotel's Wi-Fi, and it would still work once she was offline. He was technically right, but he'd failed to tell her that once loaded, she had to leave the app open for the directions and the location to stay visible. This was the fatal mistake that put Maddie into her undesirable predicament on the wrong Parisian sidewalk. Since seeing that perspective of the Eiffel Tower in person was the main instigator of her whole trip, Maddie wanted to stay within the vicinity of the tower. She Googled around and found a great deal on a place called Le Grand Hôtel Eiffel. With such a name, it was surely close by, and so she felt she could book it confidently. Hotel confirmed, flight all sorted, view address located. Maddie felt ready for her trip, and her excitement was growing exponentially with the decreasing days leading up to her departure. She knew exactly what she was going to do on her first day. Umberto, who also happened to be a big fan of Paris, had told Maddie that if she was only bringing a small suitcase, and since her hotel was apparently right outside a metro station, she could easily get there by public transportation. That sounded perfect, mainly because it would mean she wouldn't risk seeing the Eiffel Tower from the window of a taxi. She wanted to save it for that special spot. When she arrived at the hotel, she intended to take a short nap, freshen up, and then go out on her mission. Sure enough, just as Umberto had promised, upon arriving in Paris, it was relatively easy to take the subway into the city even in her drowsy, jet-lagged state. And just as its description had promised, Le Grand Hotel Eiffel was indeed right outside the indicated metro station. It had all been so easy. She didn't even need to use the expressions she'd learned on Duolingo to ask for directions. The hotel wasn't exactly grand, and her room was tiny. But it would serve her purposes. First of all, that nap. So she set an alarm and fell quickly asleep. 4 p.m. came all too suddenly. Maggie dragged herself out of bed, showered, and made a cup of complimentary instant coffee. A real Parisian café would have to wait until the next day. Reinvigorated, Maddie plugged in the fateful address into her Maps app and pushed the directions icon. 20 minutes, she exclaimed, surprised at the forecasted time it would take to get her to the destination. Maybe the word Eiffel could join the word grand in the hotel's misleading name. Maddie shrugged it off. Discovering Paris along the way would be part of the fun. It looked like all she needed to do was turn left out of the hotel and keep walking down the large street for a while, then make a few turns. Seemed straightforward enough. She set down her phone, took another sip of the insipid coffee, and finished getting ready, full of smiles, as she was getting closer to achieving her dream. A few minutes later, she slid on her shoes, put on the French scarf that Umberto had given her as a token of good luck, complete with little Eiffel Towers embroidered on it, and scooped up her phone. Woo! 40%, she gasped. I guess I should have been charging up my phone during my nap. Then Maddie remembered another wise piece of advice Umberto had given her: to regularly switch off opened apps to save battery power. So she proceeded to flick up all the active apps. Proud of applying what she'd been taught, she threw on her jacket, left her room, exited Le Grand Hotel Eiffel, and gleefully bound to the right. The sun was shining brightly, and a warm breeze was gently wafting through the air on this idyllic spring day. Maddie was soaking everything in. Parisians coming out of the bakery armed with fresh baguettes. Bunches of colored tulips meticulously lined up outside the flower shop. Waiters skillfully teetering trays topped with glasses of wine. All this added an extra spring to her step. After around 10 minutes, Maddie reached a large intersection. I think this is where I'm supposed to turn left, she said, trying to remember. I'd better check. Pulling out her phone, she first cringed at the sight of her battery's level of 30%. Well, that should get her to the spot in time. Then she clicked on the Maps app. Hey, wait a second. Where are my directions? She asked, staring wide-eyed down at the maze of foreign-named streets, with no blue line guiding to her destination. Okay, Maddie, remain calm. She heaved in between deep breaths. Think. Hard. What was the street called? Didn't it start with R? Yes. It was R. She zoomed in on the map, looking around for any streets with R's. Ruel? Oh no. Revo? No. Aha! Rue Rapin. That sounds right. Plus, it's not far from the Eiffel Tower. That must be it. Satisfied with her find, Maddie forced back on a smile and turned in the direction of Rue Rapin, cell phone firmly in hand, whose battery notification had just turned orange at 20%. She turned onto a quiet side street and tried to go back to taking in Parisian life. Around her were parents escorting their kids home from school, a gaggle of teenage girls giggling over their phones, and a pizza delivery guy on his bike. I guess it's nearing dinner time, even if it's still light out, Maddie pondered to herself. I'd better hurry up so I get there before sunset. She checked her phone, which confirmed that it was indeed almost evening time, and that her battery was now in the red at 10%. Maddie's anxiety went up several more notches when she rounded the next bend and came face to face with something very tall. And it was not the Eiffel Tower. What are those? She exclaimed, horrified at the sight before her. High rises? No, these are the wrong kind of towers. They don't belong in Paris. Where am I? Stupefied, Maddie looked back down at her phone and zoomed out on the map. Yes, she was indeed still in Paris, despite the panorama of 1970s residential tower blocks. What had happened to the classy stone buildings with wrought iron gates? Zooming back in on her location, Maddie tried to find the fastest way to Rue Rapin, which, unfortunately, seemed to be on the other side of those mammoth buildings. She took another deep breath and forged ahead down a pedestrian walkway through the oh-so-un-Parisian concrete jungle. The light was slowly fading from the sky. However, the sun was still above the horizon, shimmering on the glass facades of these modern towers. She just had to make it to her spot before the golden hour ended. She quickened her pace. Soon she reached the end of the pedestrian path. Which way now? She pulled out her phone, only to find the screen black. The chilling sight left Maddie paralyzed. You can do this, she eventually said, giving herself a pep talk. You've made it this far. It can't be much further. She turned right, then left, then right again. An image of the gateway arch flashed in her mind. A guide, the North Star. Come on, Eiffel Tower, be my North Star. This gave her some renewed momentum. She had a good feeling. She could even see a cluster of those classic stone buildings up ahead. Obviously, it was a good sign. It had to be just around the next corner. But, It's supposed to be here, right here. It was not. As she turned the corner triumphantly, the Eiffel Tower was, ever so sadly, nowhere in sight. Just at that moment, the little red scooter sped past, snapping Maddie out of her stupor. She wanted to cry, but had to save herself from being run over first. Wallowing in despair, safely back on the sidewalk, her stomach grumbled. It was only then that Maddie realized she hadn't eaten since that morning's mediocre airplane breakfast. She'd also worked up quite the appetite with all the walking she'd done zigzagging around the neighborhood. Maddie looked around. Across the street was a little restaurant called La Dame de Fer. She didn't care what kind of restaurant it was. Sullen and famished, anything would do. Bonsoir, madame, greeted a waiter as she stepped foot into the restaurant. Une personne? She had gotten up to 100 in Duolingo, so she could grasp what he'd asked, and was able to nod her head in reply. Yes, one person. She was escorted to a small table near the back of the restaurant, a few seats over from the only other customers in the restaurant, a couple well into their meal. Taking off her jacket and her not-so-lucky scarf, she picked up the menu. First things first, she was going to order a glass of bubbly. That would make her feel better. English? He offered, holding out another menu to Maddie. Oh, yes, please, she said, relieved. She really wasn't in the mood to practice her few phrases of French. Could I have a glass of champagne? Madame, I am sorry. We are a creperie. We don't serve champagne. But we do have cider. It's bubbly. She stared at him, desperately holding back her tears, and managed to murmur some form of acceptance to his offer. She didn't know what the cider would be like. However, within a flute, it would look the same as real champagne. She turned her attention back to the menu. Gazing up at her on its front cover was a jolly man in a chef's hat, enthusiastically flipping a crepe from a flat pan. And in the background was none other than the Eiffel Tower. Aghast, Maddie's eyes darted around the room. The tower was not only on the menu, it was everywhere. The placemats, the napkins, the salt shakers, the coat rack, the artwork on the walls. Everywhere. As panic was quickly taking hold, the waiter returned, plunking a small ceramic bowl in front of her. Voila, madame, he said, disappearing off to the kitchen. The odd bowl was filled with bubbly liquid. This was her cider, not in a champagne glass. Her eyes began to well up again. She'd reached her breaking point. Isn't this place so charming? said the kind voice of a stranger, yanking Maddie back from the precipice of misery. She looked up to find the soothing face of one of the diners seated at the other table. We first discovered this creperie back in 1995, carried on the unbeknownst Good Samaritan. My husband proposed to me on the top of the Eiffel Tower while we were backpacking across Europe. It's our 10th wedding anniversary, and he reenacted the scene. We just can't get enough of the Eiffel Tower, added the warm lady's husband. It's so special. Every time we admire it from different angles. The perspective from the carousel next to the bridge and the views from over in the 16th district are some of our favorite. With their kindness and enthusiasm, Maddie's spirits were lifting. Maybe she didn't need to find that one exact spot to enjoy the Eiffel Tower. She picked up her bowl of cider, a gesture mirrored by the friendly couple. Santé! The three of them cheered in unison. To la Dame de Fer, added the woman. La Dame de Fer, la Dame de Fer, pondered Maddie. Of course, the Iron Lady, the Eiffel Tower's nickname. Everything would be all right. Apparently, she had actually found the Dame de Fer today, just not in the way she'd meticulously planned out. There was always tomorrow. Well, or the next day. Tomorrow was the Louvre. She turned her attention back to the menu. When the waiter came back, she ordered the Gustave set menu and another bowl of cider, which she was growing quickly fond of. By the end of her meal, she was scraping the very last drizzles of caramel au beurre salé off her plate, glowing after her glorious first meal in Paris, and possibly also from the cider. Où est le métro? Maddie succeeded in asking the waiter after paying up. At least she remembered which metro station to get off at and could get herself back to Le Grand Hôtel Eiffel from there. Just turn right, then turn left, and you can't miss it, he replied. Maddie pushed open the door and turned right as instructed. The air had cooled, making her glad to have Umberto's French scarf, with its dancing Eiffel Towers, to keep her warm. Although her step wasn't as gleeful as earlier in the day, it was self-assured and ready to affront the new adventures her trip would surely have in store. Carefully following the waiter's directions, at the end of the street she turned left. But then her feet came to a grinding halt. Before her eyes was the sight of the glowing Eiffel Tower. A split second later, it broke out in a sparkling frenzy, which literally took Maddie's breath away. This perspective may have been framed by tall modern buildings instead of stylish stone ones, and there was no chic iron gate in the foreground. Nevertheless, she was in awe. Like the North Star, the tower had guided her to it in its own way. Now she had a new vision of it ingrained on her mind, and it was completely her own. So, that's the end of the story. As I mentioned, this one is perhaps a little tiny bit longer than they might be in the future, but I got a little carried away. I want to show you something just before we finish, and that's just a reminder of the index photo. There you go. So this is actually, it's going to, I think, pop up. This is the image that I was inspired by the story, and it is a beautiful representation of the Eiffel Tower as seen not from Rue Rapin, but from, oh, there we go, there it is, from Avenue, from Square Wrap. And I will put that information in the post about this story. There we go. And I hope that you enjoyed the story. And I appreciate everyone who took part. And I am looking forward to next week's story, which, as I mentioned before, is going to be on the Musée d'Orsay, and of course, a creative and slightly different way. So throughout the week, stay tuned for my little requests for tips and little pointers and other things like that, which will appear in the story. So if you liked this story, please leave a little comment or share it. I will post a link to it also on our Facebook page. And until next Sunday, have a wonderful week, no matter where you are and in confinement or not.